So let's just start with a brief overview of chapters 3 and 4. Okay, which is half of the Massekhet. We've looked at half of the Massekhet, the half that really deals with the reading of the Megillah. I hope we're already getting something of a sense as to why the tractate focuses on reading of the Megillah rather than on the festival of Purim, but by the time we finish the Massekhet, I think we'll have a clearer idea yet. Okay, so the first two chapters focus on that with some digressions, as we've seen. Now, what about chapters 3 and 4? Okay, what are they dealing with? So the three Mishnayot that are the focus of tonight's shiur all deal with which topic?
Well, we jump in with the question of what you can do with different kinds of property. What property can be turned into what other kinds of property? And then it jumps back over to when things are read.
Right, and specifically, which kind of property are we talking about? What's the focus?
Kind of a town center becoming a synagogue, becoming various kinds of the outside of a Torah scroll, and then returning to each of those, to some of those topics.
Okay, right. And of all those kinds of property, is there a focus on one of them in particular?
We return to the town square, and we return to, we return a number of times to the town square.
Actually twice.
And to the synagogue. Twice to the town square, right. More to the synagogue. A lot.
Right. So in Mishnah 1, in Mishnah 1, you do have a listing of different kinds of property. But in Mishnah 2, talking completely about the Beit Knesset. In Mishnah 3, we're talking completely about the Beit Knesset. Right. So and as we'll see in Mishnah 1 as well, Beit Knesset is very much the focus of the discussion, even though the Beit Knesset per se is only one of the items that's listed. Okay, so I think it's fair to say the first three Mishnayot are focused mostly on the Beit Knesset. And what particularly about the Beit Knesset would you say these Mishnahs are concerned with?
I mean, in the first one, we're talking about kind of its relative holiness, what can be transformed into it and what it can be transformed into. And then we're concerned with, we kind of expand this question of buying and selling and what it can be transformed to, and what would be a profaning of it. When does it stop being a Beit Knesset if it's been destroyed or something like that? So transformations.
Right. Now, all of those basically fall under the heading of sanctity, right?
Yes.
And in fact, the term sanctity appears twice. Once at the end of the first Mishnah, okay, where it says you can't sell that of many to an individual because it diminishes its sanctity.
Mm-hmm.
As we'll see, it's not altogether clear that that's talking about a Beit Knesset, but the term sanctity is definitely highlighted there. And then at the very end of the section, almost at the very end of Mishnah 3, Kedushatan af kshein shomamin, right? So and that's definitely talking about a Beit Knesset. Okay, so the sanctity of the Beit Knesset is really the focal point here. And one of the things we'll be discussing later on is what do we mean by the sanctity of a Beit Knesset? Where do we get the idea that a Beit Knesset has sanctity? And if it does have sanctity, then there's some puzzling things about the way it behaves. Within the realm of sanctity, usually things act a little differently than what's being presented here in these Mishnayot. Okay, but in any event, the sanctity of a Beit Knesset is really the focus of these Mishnahs. Okay, then we move on to the second half of the chapter, which has a very clear focus.
What is read on what holidays?
That's
and
right.
Days in general.
Torah reading on different holidays, a different event. And at the very end of the chapter also, the Torah reading that takes place on a regular basis, on Monday, Thursday, Shabbat on Mincha. Okay, so Torah reading, focused mostly on holidays, but not exclusively. Okay, that's chapter 3. And, of course, the big issue here is how are the two parts of the chapter connected? It seem to be like sort of two independent units that maybe because they're very brief got fused together somehow. As you might be able to guess, I'm not going to end with that thesis, but as a starting point, it's certainly an attractive possibility. Okay, but we'll give some further thought to that question of how the two parts of the chapter might be related. Okay, then we move to chapter 4. Now, chapter 4 is a bit more diverse, but I think we can detect a guiding theme in at least most of chapter 4, if not all of it. What would be the guiding theme of chapter 4?
I'm not sure. What did you see?
Okay, so let's survey the topics, and then maybe we'll come back to the question of the guiding theme. Okay, it opens with laws of reading the Megillah.
Yes.
Okay, which could strike one as a bit strange, right?
Since we just spent the first 2 chapters dealing with these things.
Right. I mean, isn't there? Don't you have a feeling of been there, done that? Like what? Why is this here and not back in chapter 2, let's say? Okay? And in fact, if you look at the very beginning of chapter 4, it opens with the words, HaKorei et HaMegillah. Right? And what are the opening words of chapter 2?
I think identical.
Exactly identical. HaKorei et HaMegillah. Okay? This, by the way, is a not infrequent phenomenon in the Mishnah. Okay, the fancy name for this is anaphora. Okay, where successive units open with similar language. Okay, and that just makes it all the stranger that this is not immediately following chapter 3. We'll come back, chapter 2 rather. We'll come back to that in a bit. But very shortly after this, referring back to reading the Megillah, we move on to Torah reading, right?
Yes.
And we have a kind of hierarchy of Torah readings on Mondays, Thursdays, and Shabbat Mincha. And then we move up to Rosh Chodesh, okay? And then we move up to festivals and Yom Kippur and Shabbat, the top of the list. Okay, so reading the Megillah and reading the Torah is what the first 2 Mishnayot talk about.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Mishnah 3 talks about different things that can be done only with a minyan.
Yes.
Right? Okay, so that's Mishnah 3. Of course, one of the things that can only be done with a minyan is Torah reading. Okay, so that's a kind of natural outgrowth of the first 2. And then in Mishnah 4, we return to Torah reading, but now we attach to it reading the Navi. That's in 4 and 5. Reading the Navi was another one of the topics listed in Mishnah 3. Right? That's one of the things that can be done only with the minyan. And then as we move along, we talk about other topics listed in Mishnah 3, such as porsin al Shema. Well, we won't talk right now about what that means. It's some kind of way of reciting the Shema. And we talk about priestly blessings. All of these are in Mishnah 3, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's also, okay, it's also a continuation of that. Okay, in Mishnah 8, we also talk about, actually in Mishnah 6, as well as Mishnah 8, we talk about Over Lifnei HaTeva, which is a Shlech Tzibur leading the prayer, another topic listed in Mishnah 3. So basically in Mishnah 4 through 8, okay, we have different laws relating to the different ritual performances that are listed in the first half of Mishnah 3. Okay, and then starting with the second the second part of Mishnah 8, the Mishnah sort of takes a sharp turn and starts talking, first of all, about heretical types of activities, but again, these are heretical types of activities that would normally be done within a ritual context. Okay, wearing tefillin, reciting prayers, presumably also in public. And then in Mishnah 10, we come back to reading the Torah and reading the Navi, and different parts of reading the Torah, reading the Navi, that will or will not be translated as part of the reading. Okay, so I think it's fair to say that the overarching subject of the chapter is reading Torah and Navi, okay, and along with other ritual performances that also require a community. Okay, so now there are some of the details here that we need to think through how exactly they fit into that framework. But you know, I think that would be a reasonable summary of what's happening in this chapter. Okay, now before we sort of give a summary of what's going on in chapters 3 and 4, let's come back and think for a bit about the question we asked, which is that the opening of chapter 4 seems strikingly out of place, but seemed to fit in better with chapter 2, or as an immediate follow-up to chapter 2. Okay, now I have on the screen here the text of the Talmud Bavli. Okay, now look at the top. Zeh klal davar shemitzvato bayom kasher kol hayom. That's a quote from the Mishnah at the very end of chapter 2.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You see down here at the bottom, Hadran alach hakorei l'mafreya. Okay, Hadran alach hakorei l'mafreya means that we have concluded chapter 2. And what do we go into? Hakorei Megillah omeid v'yoshev. Go right into what we have in our Mishnah is chapter 4. Okay, and if we let me get this out of the way here. There we go. Okay.
In the Talmud, when we get to the end of what we think of as chapter 4, does it then go on to chapter 3? Does it keep those as okay?
Yes.
So it just flips the two of them, or we have flipped the two of them.
Flips those two chapters. Okay. So now the question is it the Talmud Bavli that flipped the two chapters, or is it our Mishnah that flipped the two chapters? Maybe the Bavli has the original order, and what we have in our Mishnah maybe is the second order. Okay, so here we have a facsimile of the Kaufman manuscript. Okay, that's the premier Mishnah manuscript, okay, written in by a scribe in Italy in the 11th century. Okay, and it reflects the Eretz Yisrael tradition of the Mishnah text. Okay, if we look here, okay, so you have it at the end of chapter 2, Kol halayla kasher l'ktzirat ha'omer, etc. Zeh haklal, davar shemitzvato bayom. That's the end of chapter 2. And we move right into B'nei ha'ir shemachru rechova shel ir. Okay, so the manuscript evidence supports the Mishnah as we have it. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Your question about the Bavli is right here, right? The on 25 on Kafei Amud Bet, the Bavli has B'nei Ha'ir. Okay, so that's where the answer to your question. Well, let's move on to the Tosefta. Okay, the Tosefta is a Baraita collection that accompanies the Mishnah and usually adheres to the order of the Mishnah. Okay, and here you have in chapter 2 of the Tosefta, Halacha Yud Kol Yom Henei Fasur B'Chodesh Kol Yom HaShvi'i Chayav Basukah. So Kol Yom Henei, Kol Yom HaShvi'i, Kol Yom HaShvi'i, that's clearly related to the last Mishnah in chapter 2. Right? Because in the last Mishnah in chapter 2, we have Kol Halayla Kasher L'Ksirat HaOmer, Mishnah 5, Kol Hayom Kasher L'Kriyat Megillah. So Halacha Yud is clearly affiliated with chapter 2. And if we jump down to Halacha Yud Bet, Rabbi Menachem Rabbi Yossi Omer, Beit HaKnesset Lo Yikchu Et HaRechava. That's our chapter, B'nei Ha'ir. So the Tosefta clearly supports the order as we have it. Okay, here's the Yerushalmi, Talmud Yerushalmi, the end of chapter 2, Kol Halayla Kasher L'Sfirat HaOmer, and Hadran Alach HaKorei Et HaMegillah. Okay, that's the end of chapter 2. And immediately goes into Mishnah Aleph, B'nei Ha'ir Shemachru Rechova Shel Ir. Okay, I think it's pretty clear. The odd man out here is the Bavli.
Yes.
Okay, and the other reason why it makes a lot of sense that the order we have is correct, because it's pretty clear why the Bavli changed the order. Changed the order because of the question with which we opened. It's some scribe who was copying the Bavli said, this makes no sense. HaKorei Et HaMegillah can't be chapter 4. It's got to be chapter 3. So he flipped it. Okay? But the order that we have is clearly the correct order. It's the manuscript order. It's the Tosefta. It's the Yerushalmi. I think there's very little doubt about it that's the correct order. Okay? But then, of course, that raises two questions. Number one, why is HaKorei Et HaMegillah made, Yoshev, left to chapter 4? Okay, that we'll deal with when we get to chapter 4. Okay, but let's deal with another question now, and that is, how is the beginning of chapter 3 a follow-up after chapter 2? Why does that belong here? Okay, so that will really get us into the question of what are chapters 3 and 4 really about? Okay, and here, let me bring another reason why I think it's abundantly clear that chapter 4 follows chapter 3 and not vice versa. Because the opening of chapter 4, if you leave out this brief piece about Megillah reading, when it gets into Monday, Thursday, and Shabbat Mincha, you read the Torah, and on festivals you read the Torah, that is a direct continuation of the end of chapter 3.
Yes.
Right? It makes perfect sense Okay, again, you just take that little section out of the opening of chapter 4, okay, now bracket it, put it aside, and we have a real continuum. Chapter 3 leads right into chapter 4, right? And that already tells you what the main theme of chapters 3 and 4 is, okay, namely the reading of the Torah. Okay, and that then gives us, this, by the way, this idea was noted already by some of the classic Mishnah commentators, such as the Tosfot Yom Tov, that if you just take a bird's eye view of Tractate Megillah, you have 2 chapters devoted to reading the Megillah, and you have 2 chapters whose main theme is reading the Torah. That's the bird's eye view. Okay, then, as we've seen, reading the Torah leads into all kinds of byways and different, and different subtopics and subheadings that somehow branch out from there. Okay, but now we can sort of redefine and refocus our question about the first half of chapter 3. First half of chapter 3 is focused on the sanctity of a Beit Knesset. Okay, again, with a few other topics that are sort of appended to that. Okay, now why are we opening with the sanctity of a Beit Knesset?
Well, in the last, particularly in Mishnah 9 of the last chapter, we've been talking about the walls of Jerusalem. We've been talking about, you analyze that structure in terms of linked times and linked discussions of place. So the kind of the place theme is getting brought forward. But that's a very zoomed out answer to that question.
Okay. I think you're on to something. We'll try to focus it a little more clearly in a bit. But before doing that, let's think a bit about what a Beit Knesset is. Well, what is the function of a Beit Knesset, actually?
It provides a place for you to come together and read the things you're supposed to read as a group, and to store a Torah scroll where it can be safely stored.
Mm-hmm. Okay, now when you say read the things you're supposed to read as a group, okay, what kinds of things would they be reading?
Torah, mostly, at the appropriate bits and the appropriate times. Okay,
not Torah mostly.
Torah, all the time.
In
Torah.
Its broader sense, exclusively.
Yes.
Because the rabbis didn't approve of anything else being written, right? They didn't have Mishnahs, they didn't have Talmud, not only because they hadn't been composed yet, but because they didn't think they were supposed to be written. Okay, these were supposed to be oral law, and oral law is not supposed to be written. Okay, and the Apocrypha are not supposed to be studied. Okay, the rabbis had no control over their being written because they were written outside of the circles of the rabbis. But the rabbis were very insistent that they weren't supposed to be read or studied, right? With possible exception of Ben Sira, right? But maybe with a nod to the fact that you have a holiday coming up, maybe with the exception of one or another of the books of Maccabees. Okay, maybe that also somehow had some privileged status in rabbinic thinking. But as a rule, the only things that are supposed to be written at all, okay, are in fact Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim. That is the function of a Beit Knesset, and not really as people usually imagine. Okay, I was pleasantly surprised by your response to my question of what the role of a Beit Knesset is. Because most people would say for communal prayer. Okay, but the truth is that before the Beit Knesset became a place for communal prayer, it was originally designed as a place for Torah reading. Okay, and again, Torah in the broader sense, Torah, Nevi'im, possibly Ketuvim. Okay, that's what it's designed for, and that's why the earliest synagogues are from before there were fixed prayers. Okay, there was no such thing as fixed prayers that bring the community together at the time when the earliest synagogues were constructed. Okay, and that's why archaeologists, historians have identified Torah reading as being the earliest and main function of a Beit Knesset. Okay, we'll talk more about that as we go along. But that might already give us an inkling as to why chapter 3 doesn't jump right away into the reading of the Torah, but starts off with the Beit Knesset.
Setting the scene where the reading happens. The preamble on the place where the main topic will take place.
That's right. Very good. Okay, and now to focus this yet more sharply, let's look at the first words of our chapter. B'nei ha'ir shemachru rechova shel ir. Okay, the members of a city that sell the central square or plaza of the city. Okay, now the wording of this sentence should have some resonance for us from within our tractate.
We spent a lot of time separating people out into the people of cities, villages, and walled cities.
That's right. Okay, now just to fortify that a bit, how is a city defined in chapter 1?
By being walled, or by being walled.
That's actually how a krach is defined.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
An ear, by having more than 10 people who can regularly be counted on not to be doing work, but instead to be gathered for religious purposes.
Okay, so why is that an important point for our purposes?
It means they could be doing all of these things that require a minyan regularly with no difficulty.
Okay, so now what we're seeing is that the opening of chapter 3 harks back to chapter 1, and chapter 1 anticipates chapter 3, or actually more accurately, it anticipates chapter 4. Because chapter 4 has the Mishnah that tells us what things can be done only with the minyan. Right? So now we're getting a real sense that, this brings us back to the point that you made earlier about the importance of place in chapter 1. And now we have a clearer focus on it. The main place that we're focusing on, both in chapter 1 and in chapter 3, is a city. Okay? The city is the venue for reading the Megillah in chapter 1. Okay? And as we saw when we analyzed chapter 1, the city, and particularly the walled city, is a stand-in for the wall of Yerushalayim. Okay, the walled city of Yerushalayim. Now we move on to chapter 3. Okay, and in chapter 3 we open up with the city. Okay, and then we quickly move into the part of the city in which the Torah is being read. Okay, so we are continuing with a certain theme. So if in chapter 1 there was a strong focus on the city as a venue for reading the Megillah, in chapter 3 we also talk about the city as a venue for reading the Torah. Okay, and as we move on for other ritual performances as well. Okay, but what is added in chapter 3 that we didn't have in chapter 1 is where in the city. Okay, there is a place in the city where this happens, and that place very soon replaces the city itself as our focus. Okay, so I think that gives us, I think, a much clearer understanding of how the Mishnah is operating. Okay, we've got these two topics: reading the Megillah and reading the Torah. By the way, reading the Megillah and reading the Torah, have these been compared anywhere else in our tractate?
We had places in which the Megillah needs to be written with ink on paper, just as a Torah is written with ink on paper, and we had the question of whether you can read it in other languages, much as we discussed the Torah, whether you can read it in other languages. So we've had a number of parallels, although the Megillah doesn't seem to be quite on the same level necessarily.
That's right. Okay, so the theme that we're seeing in the overall structure, the theme we're seeing in the macro is something we've seen earlier in the micro, right? We saw how in chapter 1 you had a very central Mishnah, the centerpiece of the Ein Bain, that talks about the Sefer Torah, okay, and how it can be written in other languages because it's read. It's not just the ritual object. The ritual object that's the focus of actual reading. In chapter 2, we saw how the laws of writing and reading the Megillah are patterned on the laws of the Torah. Okay? And now in chapter 3, we actually start focusing in directly on the laws of reading the Torah. Okay? So we have this parallel, and we have the place where the city becomes now narrowed a bit to the Beit Knesset. Okay, so that's our overview. Okay, and the overview was already introduced some of the main themes that we can expect to find. Okay, and again, what I always particularly enjoy when looking at these kinds of Mishnah units is when you see a certain idea emerging in the micro, and then you find it again in the macro, and vice versa. Find an idea in the macro, and then you zero in on the micro, and you see this idea repeating itself. That, to my mind, that's a very powerful indicator that you're on the right track. Okay, the pieces are falling into place. Okay, so let's look now at the micro. Okay, so we'll actually look at the first Mishnah, and let's try to get a clearer sense of what's happening in this Mishnah. Okay, so you already mentioned earlier that there's a kind of hierarchical structure in Mishnah 1, right? So you have, and it's a hierarchy of sanctity. Okay, again, refer to the upcoming festival of Hanukkah, because the underlying principle of the main part of Mishnah 1, okay, is something that we're very familiar with from the laws of Hanukkah. Okay, why is it that when you sell a city plaza, you can purchase a Beit Knesset, but not vice versa? Okay, when you sell a Beit Knesset, you can purchase a teva, which means what we call an aron kodesh, but not vice versa. Okay, when you sell a teva, you can purchase the cloths that cover the Sefer Torah, but not vice versa. Why is all of that? What's the principle?
In each case, we're moving from something with less sanctity to greater sanctity. So you can do a trade that increases or intensifies the amount of the level of sanctity,
Right.
but you can't water it down.
Right. Okay. That principle has a name in halacha. It's ma'alin b'kodesh v'lo moridin. Okay. Does that ring a bell from somewhere? Ma'alin b'kodesh v'lo moridin. Where are you familiar with that from?
I actually don't know.
Okay. Okay. The source of it actually is in Tractate Menachot, referring to the showbread. Okay, that was moved from one table to another and following this principle. That's the source. But the better known source is the machloket between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai about whether we mosifin v'holchin when you light the candles or whether ochatin v'holchin. Beit Shammai says it's like the parei hachag. It's like the bullocks that are brought in the Musaf offering every day of Sukkot, which move down from 13 to 7. Okay, so first day you bring 13, then 12, etc. And Beit Hillel says, no, it's Mosifin B'holchin, okay? So you do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, as opposed to Beit Shammai's 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now, then the Baraita on Massekhet Shabbat gives you the reasoning of Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. And Beit Hillel's prime reason is Ma'alin b'kodesh v'lo moridin. Okay, and let's remember that the Hanukkah lights are described in the Talmud as having some kind of sanctity. Okay, we recite that Hanerot halalu kodeshem ve'en lanu reshut lishtamesh b'hem. Right, we regard them as having some kind of sanctity, which is an interesting concept to apply there, and engendered some interesting discussion among the commentators. Okay, but for our purposes, that's just the analog. That's what's going on in our Mishnah. Ma'alin b'kodesh v'lo moridin. So without actually using the term sanctity, the Mishnah has indicated that all of the items that are listed here have some degree of sanctity, and so the Mishnah is in effect creating a hierarchy of sanctity. Okay, now it bears noting what stands at the pinnacle of this hierarchy of sanctity.
A Torah.
The Torah. Okay, why is that interesting?
Well, that's also the topic of these two chapters. So this nicely crescendos to the topic of the second half of the Massekhet.
Right. So in other words, the Torah is not just a higher form of sanctity than the Beit Knesset. Okay, the Torah is actually the most sacred spot in the Beit Knesset. If you look at the hierarchy is not just, listing things, A is greater than B, B is greater than C, C is greater than D. Okay, just think about how the Mishnah is moving. You start off in the town square, and then you go into the Beit Knesset. Where is the Beit Knesset located?
Somewhere in the town, probably in the town square.
It should be in the most central spot in town. That's right. So within the town square, you locate the synagogue. You go in. And then you enter the synagogue, and what do you encounter as you enter the synagogue?
You're going to view the Ark of the Covenant, which is inside of it somewhere.
Okay, you encounter the Teva, the Aron Kodesh, and you get a little closer, and you encounter the mitpachot that are on the Torah scroll. Then you encounter various other scrolls, Sfarim, and finally, the Sefer Torah itself. Okay, so this is really a kind of geographical description. As you move in from the town square, okay, you're getting higher and higher in sanctity, and in a way, what the Mishnah is really saying is that the centerpiece of the sanctity of the Beit Knesset is the Sefer Torah. Okay, now that's an interesting point that we'll come back to. But first, I'd like to pick up on another point. Okay, the Mishnah says that when you sell a town square, then what should you buy with it?
A synagogue.
A synagogue. Okay. Could instead I buy a tennis court?
No.
Swimming pool? Why not?
Because this is part of our concentric ring structure. You can't, that would be downgrading it to mere normal land that you can turn into a tennis court.
Okay. Does that mean that the town square has sanctity?
It seems to definitely mean that.
Okay, that's what it sounds like. So let's move down. The Talmud actually discusses this point. Okay, Amar Rabba bar bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Zo divrei Rabbi Menachem bar Yossi stum ta'ah. Stum ta'ah means a stam Mishnah, an anonymous Mishnah. Okay, this Mishnah was stated anonymously in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Menachem bar Yossi. Okay, by the way, he was mentioned back here in the Tosefta, right? Rabbi Menachem bar Rabbi Yossi Omer Beit Knesset lo yikchu et harechava. Okay, so the Talmud picked up on that and said, oh, he's the one who thinks that a town square has sanctity. Aval Chachamim Omrim, says Rabba bar bar Chana, harechov ein bo mishum kedusha. No, the town square has no sanctity. So that's interesting. Our Mishnah took the opinion of an individual rabbi and just stated it as though it were a universally agreed principle. That didn't even give us any inkling. There was a disagreement about that point. Okay, now that's an unusual thing for the Mishnah. It's not unheard of, but it's unusual. And now some might say that this is done for halachic reasons because the Mishnah redactor agreed with Rabbi Menachem Rabbi Yossi, who, by the way, was a contemporary of Rabbi, the Mishnah redactor, the son of the famous Rabbi Yossi, who was one of Rabbi's teachers. I think that actually something else is going on. Okay, why is it important for the Mishnah redactor to present the town square as itself possessing sanctity? The sanctity doesn't start when you enter the synagogue. The sanctity starts in the town square. Okay? Actually, I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. Let's hold that question for a bit and continue for a bit in the Gemara, because the Gemara makes an important point here. Okay? So the Gemara says, Rabbi Menachem bar Yossi mai ta'amei. What's his reasoning? His answer is, O'il v'ha'am mitpalelin bo b'ta'aniyot u'v'ma'amadot. Now this ma'amadot is not exactly clear what it's doing here, so let's just ignore it for our purposes. But ha'am mitpalelin bo b'ta'aniyot. Okay, what's that referring to? Okay, so there's actually yeah.
Are these voluntary ta'aniyot? Not because we did mention
right.
earlier
These are,
in our...
Okay, these are ta'aniyot that are described in Massekhet Ta'anit, not in the framework of our fixed fast days that commemorate historical events. I wouldn't exactly call them voluntary, but these are fast days that are observed during a time of drought or other very, very serious communal concerns, impending tragedies that are threatening the community. And the Mishnah in the second chapter of Ta'anit, the very beginning, says that the ritual performances on the Ta'anit, the community comes together and motzi'in et hateva l'rchova shel ir. Okay, the Aron Kodesh is taken out of the Beit Knesset into the town square, which is probably a symbol of exile. Okay, a symbol of of God's presence not being in the right place and the community not being in the right place. Because that's what a fast day is all about, in the sense that things are not in the right place. We have to repair things. We have to work on getting this teva back into the synagogue. Okay, that's our job. And how do we do that? By fasting, by having a sermon which motivates the people to repent, by reciting special prayers with special additions, okay, imploring God to accept us, right? And all this takes place in the town square. So coming back to our Talmudic discussion, that's Rabbi Menachem Bar Yossi's opinion. He says, since the people pray in the town square, it attains a certain degree of sanctity. And the rabbis answer, Hahu Akrai Bialma. Oh, that's not something fixed. That just happens occasionally. That doesn't confer sanctity upon the place. When you do something on a regular basis, that will confer sanctity on the place. You're not going to sanctify a place just because once in a blue moon, every few years, several times you will use that place as a place for prayer. Okay, so that's actually the dispute. Okay, now, why is it that the Mishnah wants us to focus on that reading, the reading of Rabbi Menachem Rabbi Yossi? I think it has a lot to do with the connection we saw in chapter 1 between the city and the city. Okay? Where does the sanctity of the temple actually start? We saw it in the first chapter.
At the outer walls, or at the
outer wall of the city. The outer wall of the city is also the outer perimeter of the temple. It has a degree of sanctity. It's not the same sanctity as the Temple Mount itself, certainly not the sanctity of the temple structure itself, but it has a degree of sanctity. And there's a kind of unity. The sanctity of the temple is hierarchical, and the sanctity of the synagogue is hierarchical. And when I say it's hierarchical, it's not only hierarchical in terms of what goes on inside the structure, but also in terms of what goes on outside the structure. The town square as a kind of is, in a way, the outer perimeter of the synagogue. And Rabbi Menachem Rabbi Yossi says, and the proof of that is that on fast days, you move out there. You move out to the town square in order to pray. And the reason you do that is because it's the outer perimeter of the synagogue. You don't go completely outside of the synagogue framework in order to conduct these rituals on the fast day. You go to the outer perimeter of the synagogue. It's normally not part of the synagogue, but on these days it is. But that already is telling us something, I think, very interesting about the sanctity of the synagogue, and something no less interesting about the sanctity of Yerushalayim. Okay, the city of Jerusalem, the wall of the city of Jerusalem, not a wall that's designed for sanctity. It's a wall that's designed for other purposes. Designed for political purposes,
military purposes,
military, sociological, it creates a certain kind of a community. And the sanctity of the temple has some relationship to that community. Okay? Now, the sanctity of a synagogue, from where does it derive?
From both the physical object of the Torah in its center, its most sacred spot, and the thing that one does in it, the reading of said Torah.
Okay, very good. And what's the most sacred spot in the temple?
The Holy of Holies.
What makes it so sacred?
That's where God is.
Okay, and why is God there of all places? What else is there in the Holy of Holies?
The Ark.
Okay, the Ark, and inside the Ark is the Torah.
The Torah.
Okay, for the tablets, and also at the end of the Torah, we're told that when Moshe Rabbeinu wrote a Sefer Torah, he put it inside the Ark. Okay, the Ark in the Mikdash houses a Torah, and that's where God appears. That's where the presence of God resides. Okay, and the sanctity of the temple is founded on the community. It's founded on a place which draws the community together, which creates a certain communal structure. That's the wall of Jerusalem. And it moves up to the Torah, where the presence of God can be most strongly felt. Right? Now, I think that's really raising an interesting question. What is the relationship between these two sources of sanctity? Okay, how do they interact? Well, that's a question in Jerusalem. What about a synagogue? By adopting the opinion of Rabbi Menachem, Rabbi Yossi, what is the Mishnah telling us? The synagogue is patterned on
the temple, and like the temple in Jerusalem, whose holiness spills out into the whole community, to the bounds of the community, similarly, this holiness spills out into the sort of everyday communal space of any old town in the diaspora.
Right. And let's reverse the direction also. It's not only that it comes down and spills out, but also the communal foundation is the foundation, is
the wide base.
Okay, for the sanctity of the Torah. Okay, in other words, God appears to a community, so you have to have that community. And when you have the community, then God can give the Torah. When he gives the Torah, so then that becomes an engine for sanctity. But the engine for sanctity presupposes the community, okay, with which God is communicating. So you have to start with the community and move up to the sanctity. It moves in both directions. Okay, you move from the community up the ladder towards the Torah, and you move from the Torah down back into the community, and that filters down into other areas of communal life. Okay, that's the dynamic that we had in Jerusalem, and that's the dynamic that's recreated in every community in a synagogue. Okay, now, okay, that's a nice drasha. Can we ground it more clearly in the text? Is there any indication in the text of our Mishnah here that in fact the sanctity of a synagogue is grounded in, or is modeled on the sanctity of Yerushalayim and the temple? Okay, don't just stick to the Mishnah we're looking at now. Look a little more broadly at the surrounding Mishnayot.
Well, repeatedly, I mean, I remember at the end of the last chapter, we returned to the walls of Jerusalem were one of the elements that arose, and we've repeatedly had these connection to our walled cities. I mean, in terms of just like little links, we've kind of repeatedly had snippets that connect us back in this direction. But let me think.
Okay, I'm thinking more specifically about a Beit Knesset and the temple.
Mm.
Let's take a look at Mishnah 3. Okay, V'od Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Notice again, very interestingly, the Mishnah quotes only the individual opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Doesn't quote. Presumably, there are rabbis who disagreed with him, but only his opinion is quoted. And he talks about what happens when a synagogue is destroyed. What does he say about a destroyed synagogue?
You
Did it lose its sanctity or not?
no.
Did not. It retains its sanctity. Okay? You don't you don't eulogize the dead there. You don't conduct different kinds of business there, right? With
You don't
ropes,
use it as a shortcut.
with traps. You can't use it as a shortcut. And on what does he base all this? Look at the pasuk. Vashimotiet mikteshechem. I shall lay desolate your sanctuaries.
Mm.
Okay, what did Rabbi Yehuda see in this pasuk?
A connection to the desolation of the temple.
Right. He said, what Rabbi Yehuda is in effect telling us is, this is taken from the Tochacha at the end of the book of Vayikra, okay, in which the climax of all of the punishments that God visits on his people, the climax is, I will destroy your sanctuaries. And Rabbi Yehuda says, sanctuaries in the plural? I thought we had one sanctuary, in the singular. What's his answer?
That all of these synagogues are also sanctuaries. There's the one big one in Jerusalem and the many, many others everywhere else.
Okay. Could it be clearer that Rabbi Yehuda sees the sanctity of the synagogue as patterned on the sanctity of the temple in Yerushalayim? I don't think it'll be clearer. And once again, Rabbi, has gerrymandered his sources, right? He leaves out conflicting opinions and just says, "Oh, Rabbi Yehuda, that's my man." Okay, at the beginning of the section, he says, "I'm with Rabbi Menachem, Rabbi Yossi." At the end, he says, "Oh, I'm with Rabbi Yehuda." Okay, in both cases, he picks the opinion, cherry picks the opinion that will get you to the idea. The idea is, the synagogue is patterned on the temple, and the flip side of that is, just as the temple has a very strong symbiotic relationship with the walled city of Jerusalem, so the town square, also has a similarly symbiotic relationship with the sanctity of the synagogue. Just to underscore that point, another couple of observations. At the we talked about, you mentioned a few times already the walled city of Jerusalem at the end of chapter 1. But actually, chapter 1 doesn't end with that discussion of the walled city. Let's take another look at the very end of chapter 1. Kedushat Shiloh yesh achareh ha'eter. Notice the word kedusha. That's the first appearance of the word in our tractate. The sanctity of Shiloh, afterwards there can be permission. In other words, there's a release from that sanctity. When Shiloh was destroyed, it lost its sanctity. Kedushat Yerushalayim ein achareh ha'eter. When Yerushalayim was destroyed, it never lost its sanctity. Okay? Why is that an interesting intertext for us here?
Well, if we're drawing a parallel between, I mean, kind of we've completed the triangle. We've been told that these synagogues don't get treated like normal space after they're destroyed. We've been told that Yerushalayim never gets treated back as normal space after being sanctified. And we have Rabbi Yehuda in this wonderful little midrash connecting them as the plural sanctuaries. So we've kind of checked all of our different boxes within the context of the Megillah.
Right. Okay. So actually, to my mind, it's actually a very remarkable idea on the part of Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, that a synagogue is so much patterned after the temple that even when it's destroyed, it doesn't lose its sanctity. Okay, to my mind, that's a very highly remarkable idea. Okay, particularly when we think about that in previous Mishnahs, we talked about how a synagogue could lose its sanctity. How could a synagogue lose its sanctity?
You could sell it and concentrate it into the, Ark of the Torah scroll, or you could up it a couple levels of sanctity.
That's right. If you sell a synagogue, it loses its sanctity, although, interestingly, in Mishnah 2, there are several opinions about how far to take that idea. Other than Rabbi Yehuda himself, it seems that everybody else thinks that it retains at least some kind of residual sanctity, right? There's something about the synagogue that's retained. You can't use it according to the main opinion, the sages. Okay, you can use it for secular purposes, but not for purposes that are sort of disgusting or dishonorable, okay, undignified, okay. According to Rabbi Meir, they can use it, but you can't specify that it's going to be used for secular purposes, right? You have to retain the right to, at least pro forma, you retain the right to retract. And Rabbi Yehuda also says, well, you can sell it for any purpose, but don't specify it, don't spell it out. Everybody's saying that when you sell a synagogue, you're not completely removing its sanctity. Something residual. Plus, of course, in Mishnah Aleph, the money has to be treated as sanctified. You're not just removing the sanctity, you're transferring it to something else. And even then, the structure itself retains something. Nevertheless, Rabbi Yehuda says, if while the structure has never been sold, it's never been transferred, sanctity has been removed, it was destroyed, that does not remove the sanctity. In that sense, it is like the temple. Okay, and one final point for tonight. Okay, we've talked quite a bit about how the synagogue, okay, is focused on the Sefer Torah, is the locus for the reading of the Torah, and in both of those aspects, it's patterned on the temple in Yerushalayim, okay, as well as in the interaction with the surrounding community and the surrounding geographical definition of a city. But there's one interesting difference between the role of the Torah in the sanctity of the temple and the role of the Torah in the sanctity of a Beit Knesset. What would be the difference? Okay, where's the Torah in the temple?
In the Holy of Holies.
The Holy of Holies. And what do you do with that Torah?
Not a whole lot most of the time.
And the rest of the time?
You have the high priest go in and
do something in front of the Torah.
Yes.
Does the high priest go in and open up the Aron Code, the Aron and take out Sefer Torah? No. He will read the Torah on Yom Kippur. He will read the Torah to the people, but he'll take a different Sefer Torah. Nobody is going to go anywhere near that Aron. Okay, we all saw Raiders of the Lost Ark, and we know what happens if you try to open up the that ark, right? And what about in a synagogue?
There
you go right up to
routinely.
that teva, you take out. That's what it's there for. Okay, that is very reminiscent of the difference between the Sefer Torah in chapter 1, the Sefer Torah and the Tefillin and Mezuzot. The Sefer Torah in the temple, is very much like Tefillin and Mezuzot, right? It's there as a ritual symbol. It symbolizes the revelation of God and the communication between God and his people, but it doesn't serve any real function, okay? It's to be, not to do. The Sefer Torah in a Beit Knesset is not only to be, it's also to be, but it's very much to do. That's why it's there. It's there because, now that's a major, major shift in Jewish history and Jewish thinking. And it plugs into things that we've seen, but let's think more about it, and we'll pick up on this as we go along. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.